Hi, my name is Misty Jones. I am a hairstylist and I work in Arizona. I've been a hairstylist for 12 years now. And I just recently had the pleasure of coming across Musashi shears, and they're actually amazing. Like, I am in love. I spoke with Colleen a little while ago and just giving her a little bit of my back history of just my fight with finding good shears that really just worked for me. She introduced me to the Musashi Dry Cutting Shear. And she let me work with it for a few days and I absolutely fell in love. So I'm excited to show you guys just some of the mechanisms of the shear, things that have worked for me, and especially some little dry cutting techniques that you can use behind the chair. Today on Colleen, we discussed adding a bit of roundness towards the top in order to give her some lift and some height. And then also we discussed just making sure that the hair didn't get too short, which can easily happen with curls. One way that you can really make sure that the hair doesn't get too short is to cut it dry. So definitely be up on your dry cutting technique and have a dry cutting shear, which is very important for the mechanism of the haircut. What I'm going to be doing today is a few different techniques. Mostly I'll be slide cutting. Now once the hair is dry, you can move it around. You can play with those curls and you can do what you need to do. Just don't do it wet. So you'll notice that I'm coming up underneath the hair. One thing that we've learned in hair cutting is that short pushes long. So having shorter hairs underneath and then going into longer hairs up top will make sure that it creates some lift for her today. Also, this is considered to just be a slide cutting technique, which helps to remove a little bit of weight out of those curls and natural hair. And as an artist, it also gives you a little bit of leeway and wiggle room, making sure that things are really seamless. You don't get too many bulky, choppy lines that often happens with curly hair. One thing that I'm choosing to do is to push the hair forward with the slide cutting along the sides. And that makes sure that Colleen still gets a nice girth and width around the front of her face versus coming behind it and actually pulling things away from her face. All of that should be noted and discussed in your consultation. I'm just going to create a little bit more height. Okay, so now that I've established the shape that I've wanted below the occipital bone, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the hair, release it, and revisit how things are looking in the mirror. I'm going to check with my client and see how shape is coming about for her before I move on towards the top, which gets really fun. So one thing that I'm going to change about her hair at this point, which is great because you get to see a different way in which the shear works, is I'm going to actually come up top above the hair and slide cut down. I'm choosing that for Colleen because she has a stronger occipital and a stronger and more pronounced lower crown. So I want to take a little bit of that weight out, which makes her sometimes think that she feels really heavy. These are all techniques and all things that you can do achieving it with your haircut. You'll notice I'm still approaching the perimeter of the sides towards the baseline that we established. So I'm going to use the same technique that I followed below the occipital, which is taking the shears and slide cutting and pushing forward towards the face in order to make sure that she keeps her girth and her width around her face versus detracting. Sometimes if you take a step back, you can see lines of weight in places that you want to definitely make a little bit more shattered. and then you just get back in there, you hold the hair up, and always be considerate of the direction in which you're holding the shears. Now, honestly, guys, I'm having to double check myself just because really this Musashi shear is so effortless, honestly. So I'm double checking myself on the amount of tension that I have to use as an artist to make sure that I don't dig in too much of the hair and remove too much weight. Once again, I'm coming on top of the hair at this point in order to definitely create more of a concave shape and a slew upward, and that way she doesn't get too heavy in this area or feel as though she's just getting too wide. One thing that you always want to consider is balance within your haircut and the proportion in regards to the head shape and the face shape. Now we've reached above the parietal ridge, so I'm actually going to do more of an exaggerated C shape, scooping that weight out. This will make sure that Colleen just doesn't feel heavy. One thing that we hear so often from our clients is things just feel heavy, and up top things just feel heavy, and it always feels so weighted up top. Number one, it's because you're dealing with a little bit more of a flatter surface into a roundness here. So you're just basically going to switch your technique. I am actually going to come up underneath the hair with my shear. I'm going to scoop out an exaggerated C shape, and this will bevel out the hair and create a lot of height for her, but also not letting Colleen feel as though she just has a big pile of hair on top of her head, which a lot of times brings clients in the chair way too soon. I'm basically just working my way around that parietal ridge. Guys, it's literally so easy. I'm actually putting more effort into it than I probably should. So one thing that I'm also being mindful of myself, and this is really the difference between working with this shear as opposed to others that I've worked with, is the soft close. The soft close will really ensure the best result when slide cutting. Now, I was told and shown also the shape of this dry cutting shear, the insides of it, the curves of it, and how it allows us to have that soft close feature, which really makes it just optimal for a dry hair cutting experience. You have absolutely gorgeous hair. It's fun to work with. So we're still following along with an exaggerated C-shaped slide cutting technique, and this is along the lines of the parietal ridge coming up underneath the hair in order to create maximum amount of volume, as well as taking out a little bit of weight in return. Now, on a lot of curly clients, I always tend to isolate my perimeter as far as what I do with the hair, I'm back along the lines of the perimeter. I'm going to slide cut and shoot that hair forward. Now I'm just going to revisit the client's shape, how she's feeling about her hair so far before I continue on towards the top, which is the apex.
It feels lighter already.
Really? Good. As I cut the hair, I actually style the hair as I go. So whether I'm twist cutting, I'm noticing the way that the direction of the curl follows. I want to go along with the undulation of the curl versus apart from it. If you go apart from it, you can actually risk taking out too much weight. But if you go along with the undulation and the turn of the curl, then you'll get a much more gradual removal of weight. So easy. So again, I am styling as I go. I'm placing those curls exactly where they want to be, not where they need to be.
What about cowlick issues?
So, and we spoke about cowlicks before we began. My rule of thumb is to leave it a little bit longer around that area. Now what a cowlick is basically the direction of the hair follicle moving in a different way from the natural growth pattern, which is usually downward. So it creates a spiral. So a lot of times you can get different textures in that area. You can get different curl patterns or curl directions. If that's a concern for your client, my rule of thumb is to leave it a little bit longer and then revisit that situation back in your next consultation. And one thing that you want to consider with a cowlick is to make sure that you have the appropriate amount of weight in that area. So that lets me know as an artist, maybe the slide cutting technique isn't the best. Maybe I need to use a different technique to not remove so much weight. So, and I'm glad that you brought that point up to me because sometimes some things come intuitively as I move throughout the hair. But one concern that Colleen has is a really strong cowlick right here in the center, which I've avoided slide cutting. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to take that area in which we see the cowlick, and I'm just going to place that hair in my hand and notch it. So you may hear of that being called different things around the industry. I've known it to be notching. There's also texturizing shears that are notching shears. Basically, it takes a much more direct and acute area of weight, and it almost creates a bluntness and a blockiness. But the beauty of it with curls is that it's not straight across. It's a little bit more lived in, a little bit more freeform. So I chose to do a notching technique in and around the cowlick that Colleen has right there in the center. And what you want to do is you don't really want to take the back end of the shear for that technique. You really just want it to just be really, really kind of acute. Now the cool thing about the Musashi shears is that there's a much more exaggerated curve towards the end of the shear. So whenever I do the notching technique with the tips of my shears, it's still not as blunt and giving me less room for error. It still takes a little bit of that weight out in order to make sure that it's a very lived in and just a really flattering shape versus blocky. So we've created some height within the top of her hair. We've also made a little bit more roundness in and around the parietal ridge. And then we shot this hair towards the bottom of the face along the nape in and around the occipital to make sure that she still feels full without feeling like she lost too much hair. Now the icing on the cake is the fringe, which is always our favorite part. Sometimes the scariest part, but for some of us it's our favorite. Now what's cool here for Colleen is that she opts to wear her natural curl in her fringe. And it's really piecey. It's not so exact, not so blunt. So the technique that I'm actually going to use here is still going to be some slide cutting. What I'll do to start off is I'm actually going to place that hair in my hand and I'll show you. I'm also, for the first time, I'm going to incorporate a comb. For curls, I'm using the wide tooth part of my comb versus the fine tooth part of my comb to ensure that I don't get too much frizziness and frayed look. I'm going to take the wide part of my comb and place the hair in my hand. So we've always been taught with the hair to put it in the tips of our fingers, 0-degree elevation. It's not that way with curly hair. You don't want to have too much tension on the hair, and that way it gives you a false representation of length. What I'm actually going to do is I'm actually just going to let that hair curve and just let it place in my hands. Basically, just let the hair be. Definitely be careful and just be considerate of both yourself and the client. So here we're establishing length in the fringe. And then with our slide cutting, shooting downward, we're going to make sure that we get that pieciness back that she enjoys. Colleen, would you like a little bit of lift in your fringe area, or would you like that to lay a little bit more to the shape of your face?
I usually do to the shape of my face so that I have it down as much on my forehead as possible.
Awesome, and that's important. I wouldn't have known that unless I asked her. But you have to make sure that your shear is working for you. if you're fighting against your shear, which I have done in the past, if you're fighting with every little cut and every little move that you make, it creates more room for error. All right, my dear. So my favorite thing to let my client do is to let her get her hands in it, or his hands. I'm gonna let Colleen put her hands through her hair and see what she thinks. If I need to remove more weight.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I can feel the difference.
Yeah.
Incredibly inside here.
Mm-hmm.
It's fabulous. Awesome.
Awesome. So we're just going to finish up here. I really enjoyed using this shear, and I can't wait till she comes back and we have our next visit, our next consultation, just to see if there's any tweaking or anything that we need to change. But so far, I think that we're both having a good experience.
Awesome. This is